Mr. President, welcome to Washington. Welcome to the Atlantic Council. It's a pleasure to have you here. The particular reason for this discussion is this competition going on in Geneva, where students from 18 European universities are competing in what's called the first European Cyber 9/12 Student Challenge Competition. They are expected to put together a set of national security recommendations in the event of a cyber crisis. And we know you've been the head of state of a country that has faced such a crisis, and you've had to make some of the decisions that we're going to be asking the students to think about. And we know also that you've taken a very, very strong personal interest in this set of issues. So we're
long before there were cyber attacks.
That's right, and this is a long-standing interest. But given all this, we really wanted to talk to you about two sets of questions. One has to do with cyber education, and the other has to do with cyber as a national security issue. So let me begin with the first. Everyone knows, including the World Bank more recently, about Estonia's expertise in cybersecurity, its experience in these areas. And your country has developed into one of the most advanced countries in the world in terms of its cyber capabilities. And you've done so in less than 2 decades, I think.
I would say not cyber capability. Cyber tends to be kind of a militarized term, unfortunately. But I would just say in IT.
Yeah.
I mean, Estonia is the home of Skype. It's not a cyber thing. It's just that it's IT. Cyber always, I mean, again, for reasons beyond me, has turned into kind of this very militarized term, even though I don't think it should be.
Well, this is relevant. What you're just saying is relevant to the first question, which is how was this expertise developed in Estonia? It obviously didn't begin simply with military work. Was it planned? Was it an outgrowth of commercial activities in the private sector? How did you develop the expertise for which Estonia is now so well known?
Serendipity. We went looking for something and found something else. I mean, which is the classic definition of serendipity. I don't know. I mean, there are various sources. One of them, I mean, for me personally, was that when I was here in Washington, I was ambassador, and I was worried about this country that was post-Soviet and poor and backward, so-called, and had no infrastructure really to speak of. That we face an uphill battle where sort of even countries like Finland, which were basically at the same level as we had been. I mean, we had been at the same level in the before World War II, were far ahead of us. And so there's one area where there was a level playing field. I mean, recall the first web browser, Mosaic, appeared only in June, July of 1993. So I mean, no one was ahead of us. And so we took off on that and said, well, this is one place where we can do things. And so, in fact, we were one of the first countries to have a web page. I mean, back when this was a very novel thing. And we developed, shortly thereafter, then Minister of Education and I sort of worked on, well, the key is to start early, and so we wanted at least kids to have access to computers. And we hadn't figured out computer education yet. Our first problem was getting access to computers. So we embarked on a program that brought computers to all schools. So by 1997, all Estonian schools were online. That was one thing. The other thing was that, in fact, I mean, since our chronic existential angst has been our small size, I remember reading this kind of slightly neo-Marxist, very Luddite book by Jeremy Rifkin called The End of Work, that was talking about how everyone would be thrown out of work because computers will be doing everything. There's some great specific examples he brings there of, sort of massive job loss. Well, we didn't think in terms of massive job loss. I said, wow, this is how we can increase the functional size of the economy, because we don't have to have people doing things that can be done by machines. We can liberate the people, so we actually can have a functionally larger economy through this than otherwise. So those are kind of the basic understandings, and we started, teaching kids in school. And the other thing that really, I think, took off, that then sort of led to an avalanche of activity on the part of students, or kids, or not so kids, was the amazing success of Skype, which are basically 4 Estonian 20-year-olds came up with Skype. And, the initial investors were Swedish and Danish, but they didn't invent this. I mean, all of the, the idea, how it works was developed in Estonia. And suddenly in this place that, people in Estonia say, oh, we're backward here in the north, up here in, sort of northeast Europe where it's dark and no one knows who we are. And suddenly there's this product that has burst on the scene the world over. And of course, the four guys are very rich because they've sold this. And suddenly you had this, other people were all inspired. And they said, wow, maybe we should all be going into software. Now, so that's none of that has to do with security. We were not thinking in terms of cybersecurity at that time. For the first time, we actually thought about cybersecurity in a serious way at the government level was in 2007, but not in connection with the cyber attacks, but slightly before that, because we had decided to, we have been on this policy of turning everything in governance into some kind of, something that is IT based, and we were having our first elections online ever, which I can talk about later. But in any case, so we actually decided it would be a good idea to game a cyber attack on elections. At which point we realized you had to do certain things, create mirror sites and all various things. And so we just done the games, and then we had the cyber attacks. The other thing I just should say right now, because I meet this every time we talk, what we had in Estonia was a DDoS attack, a distributed denial of service attack. What that means is that people can't access computers. It's like you have a key to your house and you want to get into your house. There just happen to be 5,000 people standing between you and the house. No one got in. No one got in. That's a different kind of cyber attack. And these are always confused. You say, oh, did they get a lot in your cyber attack? No. All the cyber attack was basically blocking your own access to your own house, your own data, your own property. The other kind of stuff, in terms of getting in, stealing, following what people are saying, that's a whole different ball game. And I would say our solutions are in that other ball game, not in preventing DDoS attacks. DDoS attacks can be deflected, things can be done with them, but again, it's denial of service. The distributed is how it's done, but denial of service, which is the most primitive of all kinds of cyber attacks. It just means you can't basically access your web page, your bank web page. The other stuff is what scares me.
Yeah. Well, Mr. President, I'd like to come back to cybersecurity issues in a moment, but first, one or two final questions about education, and IT education and so on. Where do you see the gaps in training and education in this area? You've just been involved in this big report for the World Bank on the relationship between IT and development. What are some of the priorities that have emerged from your own experience and from that report?
Well, again, it's a confluence of factors. Number one, what helps in Estonia is a good math and science education. Estonia and Finland are the best in the Western world, frankly. We're number 7 in the PISA test, which is the OECD test. The first, we share with Finland or sort of trade off. That means outside of Shanghai, Singapore, Taiwan, the Beijing area, and I guess Seoul or South Korea. Those are the top people in math and science. Then, when you come to what we call the West, it's Finland and Estonia. There's this great headline, the short is typically showed the way things are. In the U.S., in the British media, UK math scores behind even Estonia. Well, in fact, Estonia is number 1 in math. So math education, science education is crucial if you actually look at the number of people studying quantitative subjects, or what is called STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, is very, very low and ever increasingly low in Western societies. And in contrast, speaking purely personally, I mean, I had amazing luck in that when I was in 8th grade in Leonia, New Jersey, I had a math teacher who was doing her PhD in math education at Columbia Teachers College. And one of her projects was, can we teach kids to program? And we had this little teletype with perfo tape that we would sort of practice our programs on writing them, but you had to test them on a computer that was connected via modem to a mainframe 50 miles away. But I learned how to program when I was 13 years old. All the other kids in the class today are rich because they all ended up in this field. But it wasn't, I mean, they just took kids who were a little better in math. It wasn't sort of math geniuses or anything. And looking back, one reason why I started pushing the education thing when Estonia became independent was that I realized that, the fact that I learned how to program, the concept of programming, it's not very difficult. It's actually, it's like learning a foreign language, but there are no irregular verbs. I mean, it just is pure logic, and it's not like in every language you have, conjugating irregular verbs is really something that is hard to learn. And in fact, thanks to learning one language, it was actually a very sort of, in some sense high level, but also, primitive or easy. We learned basic, but and when I was in college, I made money programming in assembler language, which is a hexadecimal language on a PDP-8, which had a maximum memory of 8K, which is about the size of your average email with no content today. So education, being exposed to this is what is vital. There are certain skills that you need to learn early because of the plasticity of the brain or the lack of its plasticity after a certain age. But it's math, musical instruments, language. If you start playing violin at 6, by the time you're 15, you can play rather well. If you start playing violin at 15, you'll never learn to play well. If you learn a foreign language before you're 12, then you'll speak it without an accent, unless you're Henry Kissinger. And if you learn it afterwards, you will always have an accent, and you will not acquire the language as language acquisition procedure. You will learn the language, and you will always be thinking about the rules. And same thing with math and science. And the sad thing is that people are simply not learning those subjects. Already, I remember reading in 1990, 88, somewhere in there, 85% of U.S. PhDs in math and science were by people born abroad. So we're in this, it's not me, it's you. They're all coming here from us. This is not what makes me happy. But the point is that the United States is also in this dilemma that not enough American children are going to these subjects, and while paradoxically, the best education at the university, and especially the PhD level in quantitative fields, is in the United States, but the best students are not American.
Well, we're obviously fortunate that we're still attracting these people. We'll see, but
except they're not coming back to us. Is what kind of bothers me.
Well, your observation, though, about the importance of the underlying training, underlying education in math and science is very good to hear, because, as I'm sure you know, most of the attention, at least that the discussions that I hear, focus much more on purely technical training later on. And I think it's important to remind people that this has to be built on something, and that something has to start much earlier.
But I would also add something to that. The other side of the coin, and which I see, especially when talking to parliaments, is that what we're really facing now is the C.P. Snow's problem of the two cultures writ large. C.P. Snow was a physical chemist and a literary novelist. And he wrote an essay in 1959 called The Two Cultures, which was about how, he noticed that he was the one person who could sit with the physicists and chemists in Oxford at their dinner table, or he could go over there and sit with the writers, poets, and Shakespearean scholars. And he could have a fine conversation with either one, but no one else could, and they never talked to each other. But that was, he was writing about a problem in the university, sort of these two cultures. What we have today is the problem of the two cultures writ large, in that we have the geeks, we have the smart guys in math who can come up with all kinds of things, and they go, oh boy, I just figured out a new way to collect data on conversations, or whatever. And then you have the other people who have some kind of training in the humanities and the philosophical traditions of liberal democracy. I mean, none of what I say applies to authoritarian countries. They don't have those problems, but I mean, in liberal democracies, the United States and Europe, sort of, who understand, sort of the tradition of the Enlightenment and what it means to be a liberal democratic society, and what is permitted to the government, sort of classic Lockean sort of dilemma of the social contract, of what the government can do, what people are willing to allow the government to do. But they don't have a clue about the technology side. And then you end up with, on the one hand, people with a science background inventing things or that can be applied in ways that don't really quite conform to our understanding of liberal democratic governance. And on the other hand, the people who do not understand mathematics, have not studied anything beyond arithmetic, and then sort of seeing all kinds of massive conspiracy theories, not realizing that half of what they think is happening is almost impossible. I mean, the NSA cannot possibly be reading everyone's letters to their mistresses and their secret sort of heartfelt desires or whatever. Sorry, they're looking at who's talking to whom. There's enough information in that, but the problem is that the people who are making our laws do not understand the math or the science, and the people who are doing the math and the science don't understand the philosophical legal traditions of rule of law, and that we need more scientists understanding philosophy, and we need a little more math training for our philosophers and lawyers.
Well, in light of this, what is it that governments can do? If there were 2 or 3 areas where you think government policy could have the most beneficial impact, what might they be?
One of the roles of government today is to provide a secure, reliable system for those transactions that are that in the modern world are digital. What does that mean? It means that legally guaranteed contracts can be signed digitally, that you can have secure communications via means that are provided by the government, that you have access to records, you own your own data. Maybe a very crucial aspect is everyone in my country is the owner of the data that the government has. But when you go on your cell phone and you've downloaded an app, whatever kind of app it is, if you think that that's not being used, you're crazy. I mean, there is no such thing as a free app. I mean, you download a free app, it's not done by this room full of good Samaritans are saying, oh boy, let's think of something really nice for people to use. No, your data is being used by that. They are using your data and they're selling it and so forth. But things such as your health records, whatever other personal records in my country are the property of the individual. No one else has access to that. So I would say those are kind of the crucial things to do in the government citizen relationship. The government, I should say, a modern government does have the obligation to provide security in cyberspace. Not so much not at all really in the area of DDoS attacks, because that's sort of, certainly in terms of secure access, your bank accounts and so forth. There are ways of doing this that, unfortunately, at least in many countries, people have precisely because because of the CP Snow cultural thing, don't quite understand yet, and so have an obligation. But two things would be a secure identity online, meaning no one else can be you online. That can be done. There was that old, very famous cartoon, which is a picture of two dogs, one on lower down, the other one higher up, in front of a computer screen that says, "No one on the internet knows you're a dog." Well, that's the problem. No one knows you're a dog. Now, especially in countries like the Five Eyes countries, curiously enough, specifically the Five Eyes countries, are the ones that have the greatest objections to having an online identity, a guaranteed secure identity. So UK, Canada, the US, and Australia and New Zealand are the ones that say, we will never have a national identity. Well, that's very nice, don't have one. But the problem that we face right now is that to take the metaphor of the information highway of Vice President Gore, we're all on a highway where no one has a license plate.
Well, Mr. President, thank you very, very much. I'm sure this will be very interesting and useful for the students engaged in the cyber competition, to say nothing of the rest of us. I'm sure also this will not be the last time we ask you for your thoughts and advice. So with that in mind, let me thank you once more. I look forward to the next time, and enjoy your stay in Washington.
Thank you. Thank you very much.